and welcome back to the Book and Life podcast. We have one of my favorite children's authors going to be on the show today, and I fell in love with one of her books in particular, Wish Child, and I could not get enough of her. In fact, I actually bought the collector's edition for this particular author recently. But before that, we're going to get into the small advert for Marianne Curley's The Time Guardian Book 4 called The Shadow. The battle is over, the war is won, the prophecy complete, but life can't just pick up where it left off for Ethan, struggling to cope with tragic loss. At odds with friends in the guard, he finds himself adrift, jumping at shadows, sensing someone who can't possibly be there. Blaming herself for the goddess's Athena's death, Giselle swears revenge to nullify the immortals' plan for world domination, but Giselle hadn't planned on love. And that leaves her with an unbearable choice. Should she follow her heart, or the strings of a goddess short on praise but high on expectation, who continues to pull her from the grave? As the guard and the order battle through the past and into the impossible future, darkness lurks around every corner. The fight for the world's survival rests with one. Is it friend or foe who stands in the shadow? And with that exciting little blurb, we're going to jump into the conversation of someone I truly adore, and I am so excited to have on today, Celia Rees. And I apologize if I butchered your name. I say that to everyone because I never know if I'm going to get it right the first time.
Absolutely right, perfect.
Well, hey, I'm on a roll today. I've been having one of those weeks where people come in with really what I think is English names, so I pronounce it the English way, and then I'm told, no, it's pronounced this way, and of course it's the American way, and I'm like, okay.
Got it, totally right.
So, do you want to tell us about the book that you're excited about most in your newest release that's coming up?
Well, I've I guess my last book I'm still excited about, which was it started off being called Miss Graham's Cold War Cookbook, and then when it went into paperback, it was changed to Miss Graham's War. And it was published during the pandemic, which was a difficult time to publish for everybody. And in a way, that was kind of difficult for me. But it still did well. And it got what really excited me about it was I got so many really lovely emails and messages through my website and reviews on Amazon. So many people said they really loved the book, and it got them through, because it's like when you publish a book in a pandemic and people get sick and they get COVID and they're stuck in bed, they're stuck at home, some people with long COVID, and it takes ages to recover. And you want something that's going to absorb you, going to take you into a different world, and you really want to read, and that's all you can do sometimes. And yeah, I got lots and lots of messages saying the book really helped them get through what was a tough time for them, and that was really nice.
It's funny you say that, because I saw it come out and I got so excited about it, and I was like, Ian, Celia Rees has released something, because I'd gone through the period of where I'd searched all your backlist, and I'd actually bought up enough all your backlist, because I was so excited about just going back to good books. Like, I had gone through a period of a reader's slump where I couldn't find anything that absorbed me in a way that I couldn't put it down. And my husband thought I was crazy when all these Celia Reeses started coming in the post box, and he's like, what are you doing? I hit 900 books recently, so I'm really in the doghouse. And I said, I want my kids to be able to experience the books I love. And one of the first books that I once I'd experienced Marianne Curley, I found your book, Wish Child, in the library, and I devoured it. And then I was like, where's the second one? And I got that, and I went through that. But the library never had the last one, so I had to wait a really long time so I could buy it, because the library didn't have it and they wouldn't order it in. I was so mad. But yeah, that was the first sort of introduction to your material that I actually just adored. And then I started reading everything I could get my hands on that had your name on it. And that was my really introduction to you. And when I saw your new book come out, I was kind of going through it. Like I'd moved back to Shetland. I was in with my parents, and I kind of hit a real slump. I was struggling to read in the pandemic, and I don't know
I
if
did
that.
too, actually. I
Yeah,
did. I found it difficult to read. I've always been a massive reader. I
yeah.
I'm always reading something, sometimes two things or three things at once. And for some reason, I just couldn't read. I started reading Hilary Mantel's book, her
All right.
latest, her last book,
Yeah.
um, Bring Up the Bodies. And it took me about 8 weeks to read it, and I'm a fast reader. I mean, it's a long book, but
Yeah. Yeah.
I would have usually read it in a week or at tops 2 weeks, and I didn't have anything else to do. But I still couldn't read somehow. It was really strange.
I think it just threw like everybody off their games because I had actually walked away from publishing and writing at that point because I had sort of become very disillusioned by the whole industry, and I thought I need to change. I need to walk away for a bit, get my head on, and I went and I worked with kids, and then I'd literally been working with kids for like 2 months in the school, and the pandemic hit, and I was like, oh no, because then I had to get used to remote working, because I was high risk. Like I have arthritis, so they were like, "You're high risk. You gotta stay home." And I'm like, "Well, how do you teach a kid from a computer? This is new." And yeah, I mean, it totally. I couldn't write. I couldn't read, and I'm trying to juggle my mom and my dad and teach them what a writer's way of living is. Like, we have, when we get into the groove, please don't talk to us because,
Yeah.
yeah, but my dad would come in at 5 o'clock and he'd be like, right, dinner. No, I'm writing. Nope, you're coming to dinner. Oh, goodness sake. Like, I could not catch a break. And then we moved when the Shetland Islands opened and they gave us the ferries back. We jumped on the ferries and we moved back to the mainland in the UK. And I thought, great, everything's going to go back to normal. And then the second lockdown hit, and I was just like, I give up.
Yeah.
I was like, I spent the whole of last year in and out of hospital, and I couldn't read. And I must admit, I picked up Witch Child, and that got me through a large portion of being in hospital and not knowing what was going on or what was happening, because they were awful at telling me when they were going to do things, and spending 3 weeks where I couldn't sleep. So yeah, and normally I would read a book, one or two, maybe 3 books at a time. I'm terrible. I'm the same. I have a book for the bath, I have a book for bed, and I have a book for the car, and that's my system. Like if I'm going somewhere, books in the car, big book for the bed, and maybe a medium-sized one so I don't kill my wrist for the bath. And yeah, so it was weird, and even my husband was like, "You're not reading as much as you normally do." So yeah, I was relieved to see you were publishing in the pandemic, because I was a bit concerned about a lot of writers who were. I think a lot of people stepped away from publishing for a while.
Yeah, it was difficult. I mean, the book was scheduled to be published anyway. It was scheduled actually in March, and
Oh right,
the last thing I did was, went anywhere. I went to a meeting in London about a week, 2 weeks before the lockdown,
yeah,
about publicity and marketing and everything that was going to happen, and then none of that happened. Everyone was on furlough. It was a difficult time, but you have to take these things. There's nothing you can do.
yeah,
They postponed the publication till July, but it did. Nobody knew how long it would last, or the new thing. Then another strain had come along, so it was just, it got out there, and that's all you can say. I mean, for me, it was special because it was my first adult book, and
yeah,
it was about the main characters based on my aunt. So it's the first time I'd ever written really about my own family.
yeah,
Some of them are actually in the book, and so for me it was a very special book, very important. Um, and it's disappointing when a book that's special. I mean, all our books are special to us, but
yeah,
and that's one of the reasons why it can be difficult. Writing can be difficult because people are not seeing it the same way you see it. Um,
exactly.
but still, I wasn't. in the end, it was like kind of the worst thing that could possibly have happened, and then it didn't matter. Do you know what I mean? It
Yeah, I
was
do.
it was the
Yeah.
worst thing, but it didn't matter in the end. It was I was happier for people to be happy to read it, and in a difficult time, and for it to help people like that,
Yeah.
than if it had been overnight success and then just disappeared. Because it's still chugging along, and book clubs read it, and people get back to me. I had a really nice email yesterday from someone saying how much they'd enjoyed it, and yeah, it's that's the satisfaction you get, I think.
It's kind of funny you say that because it's actually scheduled for one of my. I'm going to be doing once a month. I'll be doing spotlights. So it's like once a month they get just a little time with me. I'm going to sit down, tell them what I've been reading, my thoughts on it, and I actually scheduled it for September. I'm like, this is the book I'm going to talk about in September, and I take like maybe 2 or 3 books, and I say, right, these are the ones I'm talking about in September. These are the ones for. And honestly, everyone thinks I am insane to start a podcast at the tail end of a pandemic while being a writer and sitting for my BA honors because I thought, something in me thought, I'm not doing enough. I'm writing and I'm editing and I'm studying, but I'm not doing enough. I'm going to take on a podcast. So, yeah, I'm one of those kind of writers that can't sit still. I have to constantly be working. And I think for me, like going out and interacting with readers and doing book tours, that was fun for me. That was the moment of sheer joy I got when I was talking to readers. And I know that must have been the same for you when you were interacting with readers when you were on
Yeah,
the road. And
no, it
to not
was.
have that is crazy
Yeah,
now.
it's very strange not to be doing that, and also, I mean, for me, it was a transition from when I was writing for young adults, and
Yeah,
and I did lots and lots of school visits, and I used to spend and lots of festivals and then that kind of stopped because I'm writing for adults now, and it's different and a different setup. Um, and all the festivals went on Zoom, or they stopped altogether, and it has been a really quite a difficult time connecting with readers. So one of the best ways has been actually from doing Zooms with people, being
yeah.
interviewed by people like you, and connecting to readers in that kind of way. It's a different kind of way. Before the pandemic, I'd never done a Zoom meeting. Well, I'd maybe done once or twice with publishers, but
Yeah.
it all kind of, is my mic turned on? Have I done this right or that right? And now it's like second nature, really. So,
Yeah.
it's a really great way though, because you can connect. I've done interviews with people in America, in Canada, in India, Malaysia, all over the world, which I wouldn't normally have done at all.
So how are
So
you
that's
finding
been
it?
great.
How are you finding it like going from an in-person experience to a very technology experience based world for you? Is that been a huge leap or is it been like a smooth transition?
And once I got used to turning my mic on and doing, doing all that stuff, and no, it's not. I tell you, it's odd because I'm not sure that, if we were in the same room face to face, there'd be a different feeling.
Yeah,
Definitely. I think that is different. You don't get that kind of close connection because, before we were actually on air, as it were, you'd probably have a cup of tea together and a chat, and, you
yeah,
get to know a bit more about me as a person, and I get to know about you as a person. And you don't have that, that doesn't
no,
happen, and I miss that. I miss things like festivals where you get to know people just because you were staying in the same hotel or having breakfast or talking to them in between
yeah,
gigs or in between appearances. And yeah, I mean it's become more isolating, I think, for writers. It's important to keep in
yeah.
touch with fellow writers, like people and have like next week I'm going to lunch with in for the first time for 2 years, I suppose, in
Wow.
London with some writer friends that we used to go regularly every 6 months. We'd meet in
Yeah.
a restaurant in London and with that, we haven't done this. Be the first time in more than 2 years, I think. Well, the last one was before Christmas of 2019.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, for me, like, I started, well, my writing career sort of working with wrestlers. So, like, it was just a totally different experience, but it taught me deep point of view because,
Yeah,
like, you're almost going into their brains to write a character, but then you also have to convince them to do it. And for me, like, that whole experience is in person. I mean, you can't do that on a remote call or,
no,
I mean, you have to physically be there. And then I transitioned out of that industry after sort of realizing it's a very male dominated behind the scenes anyway, it's very male dominated industry and there's not a lot of chances for female writers. So I thought I'll be an author because I have so many stories to tell. And I started working with a wrestler to create that story. And even he misses it. Like he teaches at a wrestling school, but he has to do it on Zoom. And I'm like, how can you teach wrestling if you're not physically there? Like, I'm pretty sure you have to be there for that. And he's like, oh no, there's a whole system. And it's so, it baffles me beyond sort of belief. Like I'm trying to get used to sitting on a website talking to people about things that, I would have been talking to you in a bookstore with a cup of coffee saying, hey,
yeah,
isn't this crazy? You've got a Scottish author and an amazing British author in the same room. Like, this is insane. And what I love about your transition to adult sort of novel based now is I kind of feel like we're in the same kind of club because I spent so long trying to bring sports romance to what it is now. And
yeah.
it's crazy because when I was doing it, nobody was doing it. And now it is sort of slowly took off and it's projecting upwards.
Well,
And
that's
I kind
great.
of, yeah, and I look at you and you're completely changing everyone's view with your book because I was able to actually go and see the reviews and see the different things that was said. And I was like, yeah, this is why I love this author because everything she does you connect to and you get completely sucked in and you just feel like you're being carried along in that world almost on a cloud. You get to just really be a part of it. And I I spoke so much about your stuff to somebody else. They actually went and bought quite a few of your books because they're like, Crystal,
Oh, great.
yeah,
Well,
and I so they spent their because we all have as authors and writers and readers, we all have a book allowance that we have per month. I don't know if you do this, but I'll say, right, okay, I'll spend 20 quid, maximum 20 quid a month on books. But boy, I can stretch that 20 quid when I do all these interviews. And my husband's looking at the mail coming in the inbox and he's like, Crystal, how many books did you order?
yeah,
Um, I don't want to admit it, kind of looking away sheepishly. But yeah, it's been great because I've had a lot of authors who have not really been doing appearances or talking to people and they're kind of coming on the show and they're opening up. I mean, Shirley Kennan's just gone through one of the most horrendous 3-4 years and she's coming on the show later on this year and she's opening up again to her fans and her readers because they really supported her through her own sort of scandal and stuff. So I feel like this is a safe platform for everyone to come on. Um, whether you're a first time author or whether you've been doing it for a number of years, because it really is. It's just, we're all big readers at heart and we all love books and we all have our own take on things. So yeah, it's good. And I must admit, I can't wait to actually do the review on yours.
sorry.
I can't wait to do the review on your new book. I've been trying really hard not to read it before I came on with you, just
All
because
right.
I didn't want
Okay.
to spoil anything, because I'm terrible for that. So, going into the book portion, what is the book that has stuck with you the most, especially during all this craziness?
Um, oh, that I've been reading
Yeah, yeah,
when I've started reading again, as
yeah.
opposed to just reading Hilary Mantel for a month. Um, well, the thing that I really, really love, but I'd read so. I mean, I don't know technically whether it counts because I'd read one or two of them before. Is Mick Herron's Slough House spy novels? It's
All
there on
right.
TV at the moment. And I just absolutely love them. I've read all of them, and I mean, I wait for it to come. I pre-order on Amazon, and I can't
like
wait
like all of us.
for
Yeah.
one. I think they're great, and I really enjoyed those. And that was. I mean, I suppose we're all go back to when we were young readers, and I used to love it if I found an author. I'd read one book and then I'd read all the other books, and
Yeah,
even if they're
exactly.
in a sequence, a series. I mean, I read all Game. I'm not a huge fantasy fan, but I read
Yeah.
all of Game of Thrones. My
Oh, right.
excuse was my excuse, and watched them all as well. I mean, I watched them when I was sick. I had really bad bronchitis
Oh,
and I was
no.
really ill for a couple of weeks, months
Yeah.
really. And the only thing I could do was lie on the settee and watch TV. And my
Yeah.
husband hates fantasy, and secretly wanted to watch Game of Thrones for years. And I
Yeah.
said, and I was so ill, he went and bought me the box set. It cost 70 quid, so he must have been really, really, like, he knew
Feeling
I was
guilty.
ill. So yeah, he let
Yep.
me watch it. And then when I was writing a book called Glasstown Wars, which is about it's based on the kind of Brontes, the Bronte children's fantasy world. Um,
Yeah.
I thought, well, it's a fantasy, right? So I really ought to read some fantasy. So
Yeah.
I just read all of them, and what I did was I kept going to this. I knew that in the Oxfam bookshop, the whole shelf of them is always a shelf
Yeah.
of Game of Thrones, and I'd just go and take one back and buy another, take one back and buy the next one. So
Yeah.
I quite like if I'm kind of need comforting a bit, like in you need a safe space really in your reading. You don't want
Yeah.
to be experimental. You don't want to read something you're not sure about, you've never read before. It's nice to read a whole sequence of books by someone you like, and you're comfortable with the characters as well. You know the characters, and that you want to read more about those characters and stay in their world. I guess it's like world dwelling, isn't it, where you want to be in
Yeah.
that world. um the other one, I guess, in the same sort of vein, is Michael Connolly, who writes the Harry Bosch
Yeah.
American crime thrillers. I like American crime thrillers. I mean, it's one of
All
my
right. Okay.
yeah, one of my go-to reading areas. And yeah, I will read his books. And I haven't read all. I mean, he's written like God knows how many. So
Yeah.
there's always one I haven't read, and I like the character, and I like the LA world, and I like them on TV as well. I watched the TV series when that was on.
I must admit, I'm an NCIS fan. I got into NCIS when it started, and I followed it for years because it was such an easy thing to watch. I never had to think about it, and if I was writing, it never interfered with what I was writing. And I had Fiona Cummings on, who is she's an amazing crime writer. Honestly, I never thought I would pick up a crime novel and fall in love with it. And she was my first crime novelist I ever read. And her publisher sent me the ARC. It was just because I was doing book reviews at the time. And I fell in love with her. And every time I see one of hers come out, I do the exact same thing. I go and I pick it up, and I don't read the blurb, which I really should do, but I don't. I'm
No,
one of these
sometimes I
people.
don't like that.
I
I don't
don't
want to
like
know.
blurbs.
Yeah.
I
No,
feel like it ruins things.
um if it's a book, a writer I don't know, I'll obviously read the blurb, or a book
Yeah,
I'm not familiar with. But if it's a writer I know, I sometimes won't read the blurb because I don't want to know what's happened. I want to
yeah.
discover it myself. So yeah, sometimes I do, sometimes I don't.
See, it's so funny you say that because I hate blurbs. I decided when I did Marie's World that I wasn't going to do a blurb that was long because everybody had said the same thing to me. They were like, blurbs just destroy this because we wait for those sort of, those hooks. So I just put one sentence on my book and it said, twins turn on each other for fame and glory. That was all I put on it. And the ones that actually came to my book signing said they all loved it just for that because there wasn't any big spoilers. It was
Yeah,
just simple. and they really admired that. And it's weird because the more authors I come on with, everyone says the same. Like, they don't read the blurbs either. So, like, I don't even do it with a new author. If I like the title and I look at the cover and I think, I kind of know what that is, right? I'll read it, and I do. And it's very difficult to actually get me away from an author that I like, that I know, to read something new, because I get almost in that comfy zone of, I know this, when one of my author friends died and she didn't have any more stuff that I could actually read, I was a bit sad because then it meant I had to go find somebody else. And I have like books I go to for what I call kick up the butt books, to get me back in the writing kind of mojo. And my go-to is Catherine Cookson.
Oh, right, yeah.
Because her whole journey as a writer and her obstacles she overcame, like the dyslexia and the fact that she wrote as she would speak, and the fact she actually wrote a lot of books into a dictaphone and somebody else wrote it down for her, inspired me because I'm dyslexic. I have those struggles. I understand a lot of what she went through, and it's my reminder, if she can do it, I can do it. So I call
Great.
that my kick out the butt books, and Ian thinks it's hilarious because he knows when I'm going through a writing slump, because the Catherine Cookson will come out and he'll be like, oh no. I even like start talking with a slight sort of Liverpoolian accent from nowhere, completely random. And my best friend, she's from England, but she grew up in Aberdeen, so she completely understands my accent moments. And she will laugh and she'll be like, "You're reading a Catherine Cookson again, Crystal." But it's good because she's somebody it's almost vanishing now. The amount of people I talk to, they don't know who she
still
is.
has her. I'm sure she still has her stalwart fans.
Yeah.
But I'm writers like Catherine Cookson are what I call a safe pair of hands. You can trust once you're reading one of their books, you can trust them.
Yeah.
Not exactly what you can expect, but she knows what she's doing. She knows her craft. She knows exactly what she's doing. She's not going to let you down. She's not going to go off on a tangent. She's not going to have massive plot holes in the middle of it that you're thinking, hey, hang on a minute, what about so and so? Or she's not going to fudge the ending. She's going to do exactly what she's always done, which is turn out a professional piece of work for her readers. She knows her readers, she knows what they like, and she produces work for them. And that's brilliant. I think
And I kind of
such professionals. They really are.
And she was such somebody I really admired. In fact, when I first started writing, I wrote exactly how I speak. Unfortunately, I have a very sort of Shetland upbringing where my English is maybe not the best. So I had to kind of learn that
it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and I had to learn kind of a lot of the tricks of the trade and the craft. And I went away and I learned about deep point of view, and I learned as much as I could, essentially. But I turn back to her every time, and I make a point in sort of like when people are talking about historical fiction, or they say to me, I need to know of somebody to read when it comes to historical fiction. I always point them in her direction, because I just think that she's somebody that's so underrated now and under kind of appreciated, and I think that's like a little banner I carry, is for her, is it to say.
It's a good little banner to carry. And also she wrote about ordinary people's lives in history. There's been a lot of emphasis in historical fiction of famous people or kings and queens and posh people, toffs. But it's all, but that's different, like Downton Abbey world. But hers is different. It's about real people and their lives and their struggles and how difficult life was for people. I think it's important that modern readers understand, and a writer like her is really good at getting people to actually be in the period, in the feel of the period, what it must have been like. and she's a great go-to reader as well for anyone who wants to set a book in a particular period.
Yeah.
You know, I always, well, not always, but sometimes if I'm writing historical fiction, I'll read other historical novelists,
Yeah.
not because, well, sometimes because they do my research for me. No, no, not really. Um, but
I agree with you on that, actually, to be fair. Like, when I started doing...
I don't have to do it if they've done it because they're bound to be right. Um,
yeah, exactly.
yeah, but she's a good, those kind of, they're quite old fashioned now, but they you know they knew what they were doing and they told a good story, and
She
they
really
told
did,
important
yeah.
stories, ordinary people's stories, but they knew how to tell a story. They really did.
Would you say that she's maybe been a little bit of an influence on you in your writing?
Not so much Catherine Cookson because I read her a bit, but a long time ago. Um, I'm the one, the writer. I mean, I do admire Hilary Mantel, but I'm a bit like, I am not worthy. Can't even think about writing it as well as like her. But
Right.
I think, like, actually, I was thinking about it. I was thinking about it the other day when I first started writing. I wrote thrillers for teenagers. That's what I did.
Yeah.
I set out to do it. That's what I did. But I went with, before I was even published, I'd written a book, but I hadn't been published. I went to Hay with a friend to see Philippa Gregory,
Oh,
who,
right.
I do admire Philippa Gregory. She's a really able writer
She
and
really is, yeah.
quite quite undervalued in lots of ways because she's so popular and because she sells so, she's a best-selling writer. People often think, oh, she can't be very, you know what I mean, that they kind of
Yeah,
undervalue
she's very kind of
bestsellers.
forgotten about,
But
yeah.
I think she's a very, very good writer, and she's incredibly skillful and accurate historian. And I think that I learnt quite a lot and that was ages before I actually wrote historical fiction. But when I was going to write historical fiction, because it's quite scary, because I read history at university, but
Yeah.
I've never written any historical fiction at all, really, except for a little bit in a vampire book, which was a sort of written in two, it was
I
written
read
in,
that one. Yeah, I loved that.
yeah, like, it was written partly in the present and partly in Victorian England. So Blood Sinister, I've just
yeah,
forgotten.
Blood Sinister.
Blood
I was
Sinister.
going to say it, then I thought, no, I'll let you say it.
Yeah, Blood Sinister. So, and yeah, and I loved writing that. And really, I love anything like vampires and stuff. But I had to write some of it, so I had to do kind of historical research for that. And I
yeah.
liked doing it, and I enjoyed it. But when I had the idea for Witch Child, I knew that this was going to have to be totally set in the 17th century, and
Yeah.
it was going to be a challenge, and I'd never done anything like that. So I did go back to and looked at people like Philippa Gregory and not so much how they write, but what sort of thing they included in their writing. Because
Yeah.
when you're writing historical fiction, the temptation is you do all this research, you put it all out, you want it all on the page. You want
But
everyone
you
to know all
can't.
this
Yeah.
about whatever you've been finding out about. So yeah, she's a good model, I think. And yeah, I read her, I think, more than probably the most influential. If I was influenced by anyone, it would be her.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like, I had never really, other than yourself and Catherine, I'd never really kind of connected in with this sort of historical fictional world. And then I started learning about Elizabeth Chatwick, and I started learning about all these other writers that were doing so well in like the historical fiction. I thought it was just this tiny niche genre, and then all of a sudden I found Philippa Gregory, and I found, Charlotte Bronte, and my sort of world opened. And it wouldn't have opened if it hadn't been for Witch Child. And then obviously Catherine, who I found, and my mother was slightly horrified when she realised, oh, Crystal's sitting reading Tilly Trotter. I remember what was in that.
Yeah.
And she reached across and tried to dig it off me. And I'm like, yeah, Mum, I've already read past the bit that you didn't want me to read. And I went from being the child that really struggled with reading to just loving it, because I was really able, if I hadn't found certain books, I don't think I ever would have fallen in love with it.
Oh
And
yeah,
that's,
that,
yeah. And that was something I was saying to Marianne when I had her on at the beginning of all this. I was like, you were what, like, her book Old Magic was just my first dipping the toe in, and it took me ages to read it. And it's not a big book, but because I was having to learn to read, and a lot of my life I was in hospital, so I'm learning to read plus be ill at the same time, and be a kid. And she kind of just sort of made it easier. And then I found yours, and yours was such an easy read that I didn't find myself stalling a lot. And I didn't
mm-hmm.
find it like a huge uphill battle that I had been finding other work. And that's what I was like, if I can do that, if I can like help somebody who's struggling with their reading really get into it, that helps. And I think that helps society move forward as well, because it opens the doors to all these other worlds where they can learn all these other different lessons and life lessons. And I love that ability that you have to create that. And the worlds that you created were fantastic. And I actually started to share my books with my younger sister, and it was such an honor because she actually read Bloodthirst, and she was like, oh, I love this. It was like one of the first books I'd gotten her to sit and read, and she's not a big reader. She's terribly restless. So I was like, woo, one down, gotta go, let's to go. But it's, to me, it's amazing. And I kind of credit a lot of my writing skills to yourself, to Marianne Curley, to Catherine, because what I was reading was what fueled my craft and made me very concerned about how I was putting my own stuff together. And I don't know if you've tried this technique, but I used to ask why to everything. Like, so if your heroine loves roses more than any other flower in the universe, I had to be able to say why that was.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of writers that understand that kind of process. That sometimes you need to sit and ask why, otherwise you end up with these gigantic holes.
Yeah, no, I'm always aware of that. I think, yeah, I've always been aware of that as a reader, and it's sort of second nature when I'm writing. Everything has to be accounted for and accountable. I can't have anything that's there because I want it to be there. It has to be there for a better reason than that.
Yeah.
So yeah, but that's wonderful hearing you say that about Witch Child, and it's great to hear that. Really is.
Yeah, and I think,
Really is.
I mean, I never really understood like that, what it would feel like for somebody to say it to me. And then I had this sort of really lost teenager who'd kind of like given up on books because she hadn't found anything that kind of she connected to. And she read Marie's World. And she's like, the chaos and the level of depth that I put into every character. And there's a lot of characters in Marie's World, but it's because it's supposed to be chaotic world. And she goes, I finally feel like I found a novel where somebody else is experiencing the chaos that I am. And I was like, I wrote that purely because I was living in chaos. And it just sort of translated into what I was feeling. And yeah, it meant the world to me. So I love being able to pass that on to people that I've written, like, that has inspired my writing and made me work hard. But also I know who's put in all their life work into it as well. So I love being able to do that, at least with this podcast. So
yeah. Well, you're doing a great job, I think. I mean, I think anyone
hope so.
well, I think it's really important as well for readers to connect with writers and to see it's not really a magic. Well, it is magic, but it's not magic. We're not, people think that in some ways we are special because of what we do, but in other ways, just normal people who do normal people things, like go to the supermarket and do, sit in the garden and read, do things that everyone does.
We do the boring stuff too.
And also it means that because the more they hear writers talk, then the more they can think, hey, I could do that. Do you know
Yeah,
what I mean? Yeah, it's easy. It's possible. Anyone can do it. It's not special. It's
but it
not
is also a lifestyle
exclusive. It's
choice.
special, but it's not exclusive.
Yeah,
And if you've got a story to tell and a burning desire to tell it, then you can have a go too. And I think that's a really great message. And it
and
is great when you hear, like you said, that
yeah,
you read my books and thought and really liked them, and it got you into reading, and I love it when I hear that. I mean, I hear quite a lot from people who tell me I got them into reading or got them into writing historical fiction or
yeah.
interested in history and so on, and that's great. But when it's like second generation, then you're a writer, and then someone says to you, I read your book and it spoke to me, and I could feel that what you were feeling in it. And that's when you engage. That's what reading is about. Reading isn't words on a page. Reading is feeling a connection to the book and to the writer. The writer is singing your life, is saying your life,
Yeah.
and that's when you become a reader, because that's a great experience.
And I also think, like, if I have to write what I love and I have to really believe in stuff, there was like a period of time, I think it was for like a year, I had a book that this publisher was pushing on me, and they told me what they wanted me to write, and I was sort of told what to write, and I hated it. I hated it. And it's not a book I'm proud of, because I don't, when I read it back as a reader, because I'm very critical of my own work, but when I went back and I read it, I didn't feel the passion and the purpose behind the words that I do when I look at my first series that I did that actually did well. And I think as well, this show is really good for taking away the myths of that we all sit in mansions and we have, these very comfortable lives where, we've got endless amounts of library space, and, we've got 15 dogs running around, and servants chasing after us. And that couldn't be further from the truth. 90% of us are working class people who've just got really good stories that we want to share with the world. And we make it work, whether, it's difficult or not. And that to me was important, because the amount of people that said, well, do you not socialize? Do you go out? Do you miss family things? And I'm like, well, yeah, I do sometimes miss family events because I'm editing or I've got a tight deadline. But no, I do actually socialize quite a bit. I go to dinners with friends. I've been in LA. I've met all these weird and wonderful people. And that's why I can write these weird and wonderful characters, because I've got the life experience. And I think this show's got that great opportunity, I think. And I originally wanted to do it as a TV series where all of the authors around the world could join in, and, there'd be a studio and everything else. But it was just not feasible, because I don't think broadcasters and streamers yet have tapped into the fact that you can have authors from all over the world join a show, and it can be popular. It can be something really important and something really, really special. And it's worth giving the airtime to. And if nothing else, the podcast is free and everyone can check it out, and it doesn't, there's no monetary value to it. And that was more important to me. I didn't want some studio sitting there counting their pennies and saying, oh, we need to advertise. I wanted this to be about the people and about everybody having access to it. At least if you've got a phone, you can access the podcast. That's the great thing. If you had time to just sit and read, and time was no issue, who would you sit and read? Is it would it be a series? Would it be one author? Just all their stuff? Who would it be and why?
Well, that's a very good question. That I have to think about. I was just thinking I think one of the readers that I'm a great admirer of Hilary Mantel,
Yeah,
and I read a book of hers called um, A Place of Greater Safety when I was writing Sauvé, because Sauvé is set in the time of the French Revolution,
yeah,
and I think there's a book that's coming out soon, or it's already come out, maybe, about women in the French Revolution. And I think I quite like to read A Place of Greater Safety and that book that I'd have to look up on Amazon about women in the French Revolution.
Yeah,
Because, yeah, just to compare, because I haven't read it for a long time. And I think maybe her first or her second novel. And it has been republished now since, I mean, she wrote it a while ago, but it's
yeah,
been republished since the success of of her Tudor trilogy. I mean, whatever it is, quad 4 books now. But anyway,
yeah.
of those books, yeah, I wouldn't mind doing that. But I think I just kind of, if I've got time to read, and I don't always have time, and read in
No,
bed, and
yeah,
sometimes I'll read in if I'm writing something, I'll be reading around it and doing research.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, and I've got loads of books on my Kindle that I really should read, but I try and I don't read. So
I know
yeah,
that feeling.
I think I might catch up on my Kindle and read the books that I've kind of like the look of, and then I download them and then I don't read them.
Yeah,
But my what I do really like listen Audible. I didn't to start with, but now
yeah.
I just love Audible. So to be able to just sit and listen to someone reading something to me is such a luxury. So it
See,
could be almost
I've never
anything
been able to
really.
get into that because I don't know why, but it seems to put me to sleep. I seem to like get so far in and then I sort of doze off in a
Yeah, I
way.
know. That is a problem because if you go to sleep when you're reading a book, you stop obviously reading. But
Yeah,
if you go to sleep when you're listening to something, it just goes on, and you
yep.
can't. You got no idea where you were. I was listening to Margaret Atwood, the sequel to the to her, her last. I can't remember what it's called now, but
Oh,
the sequel to um, Handmaid's Tale, and
yeah,
I think it was the first book I got on Audible, and I made the mistake of listening to it when I was like I would read it when I was in bed.
yeah,
Well, I must have listened to about half a page and I was asleep, and then I woke up 2 hours later and it was like halfway through the book, and I
yeah.
was
And you
like,
were
oh
like,
no, oh
oh no.
no, what am I going to do? And I have to go to find where I was and start again.
Yeah,
So yeah, it's that's the only problem about Audible. You could go to sleep.
I mean, I tried it when I was quite young, and that was back when you had the classic cassette tapes that you'd put in, and you hit. Oh gosh, I'm showing my age now. And press play, and my mom kept finding me completely. I was reading along with the book, and she would just find me snoring with my head sort of lying on the speaker, and she was like, "Crystal, that's not the point of this." And I'm like, I can't help it. So yeah, I gave it up, and then of course I have Amazon Prime, so it kind of comes with Amazon Prime. And yeah, so I have to struggle with that a little bit. I'm going to try and get more into it since I have a lot of those credits that I don't use, and see if I can kind of work my way around it. But yeah, I mean it's something I need to learn to do. I need to learn to not
Yeah,
like
I mean,
nuts.
for a long time I had it, and I even had credits because I'd somehow managed to sign up to that without really realizing.
I think we all
And I
have at
didn't
some point. Yeah,
ever listen to them, and all my friends were. And then I thought, no, I don't know, somebody recommended, and it was a book that I wouldn't. It was a long book. It was a non-fiction book, and I wouldn't.
yeah,
I would think twice about reading it, about actually reading it. But
yeah,
listening to it was much easier, and I quite. It was actually like listening to the radio, like a
yeah.
listening to a documentary on the radio. And I quite like documentaries. I like podcasts too. I'm quite into podcasts.
I must
I
admit
like
I do
listening
that
to
as
things.
well because if I'm getting into the space of writing something, I will stick a podcast on. And I was never really a big podcast fan. And then, funnily enough, a wrestler called Colt Cabana, who is this kind of very comedic man from Chicago, had ended up dragging me into the podcasting world, and I listened to him and I thought, oh, that's quite funny, and I can do 101 things while he's talking absolute rubbish, and I can have a good laugh and I can just relax. And then I find myself listening to him while doing the dishes or, hoovering or whatever it was that I had to get done that day. And I just discovered podcasting and I really enjoyed it. And now I listen to unsolved crimes or book podcasts or, whatever's going at that time. And it's good as well because I've been able to keep up with wrestling friends that I would never otherwise been able to keep up with because they all do podcasts on such a regular basis. So it's almost like getting a free update on how certain friends are doing, but without me having to make that really long phone call that 2 hours
Yeah.
or whatever. I could just listen to a couple of podcasts and do some crafting or whatever I need to chill out. And it's, yeah, that's why I like it. So is there an author that you would say, past or present, that really influenced you to get into reading, and also who really got you into writing?
Well, I was thinking about that, and it's a very good question. Um, when I was when I first started writing, I I wanted to write teenage fiction,
Yeah,
teenage crime fiction, and there weren't there was hardly any British teenage YA, I suppose you call it that, and then it was
yeah,
called
YA's
teenage.
is, yeah, it's
But
proper
there
title.
were American writers who wrote really, really good novels, and
Yeah,
they were like adult books. They were just as challenging reads. They were
yeah,
really like they got lots of to grab hold of, and they weren't easy, but they were so compelling that they took the reader through,
yeah,
um, and they didn't patronize, and the teenagers at the center of the book were like adult characters, treated like adult characters, and I really, really liked them. And I was teaching at the time, and all my students liked them. They really liked them, and there was nobody writing like that in
yeah,
Britain.
yeah,
Um, so I guess they were big influences. So that was Robert Cormier
yeah,
and Lois Duncan were the main ones who I kind of modelled my writing on. But also, in fact, the only writer in Britain at the time writing like that was Alan Garner, and
all
I do
right,
like Alan Garner a lot. I really admire him. So
yeah,
writers like that made me think it was a really worthwhile thing to do. It wasn't just I'm writing children's books. They were there was a lot more to them. They were really like literary. They had real literary merit and depth,
yeah,
and like modern, like old fashioned literary, but they were lots about them, lots of challenges there, but really good. They got different points of view. They got lots of different narrative techniques in them, flashbacks and fast forwards, and and they were complex reads, but because they were so compelling, my 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 students were whipping through them, and they weren't even, I mean, they were all sorts of readers. Some of them were good, but some of them were quite, found reading quite a challenge. But
yeah.
because they were great stories, they wanted to read them. And I thought, yeah, that's what I want to do too. So that was a big, big influence. And I suppose, um, yeah, I suppose that started me writing. I had a definite idea of what I wanted to do, and they were big influences on me.
Is there any of the new sort of YA thrillers that are coming out that you've sort of seen and you've maybe tried or you've enjoyed? Is there anyone sort of kind of, because there's been a huge explosion of YA thrillers now. I mean, it's become a really sort of big marketplace for different authors and stuff. Is there anybody that sort of stood out to you in the last kind of couple of years that you would say, hey, I've picked that one up because it looked okay or it looked enjoyable?
Yeah, I mean, I get quite a lot of YA novels sent to me for me to read and review.
Yeah.
Um, and I guess, I mean, I'm a big admirer of Patrick Ness. I like it. I mean,
All right. Yeah.
I know him personally, as they say. But yeah, I mean, I think he's a good writer. And there are, yeah, there are a few. I mean, of, um, I'm hopeless. Like, put on it, I can't think of anything. I
I
can't think of
think of
any names.
titles. I don't think of author names.
Yeah,
I'm
but
that bad. Yeah, I understand where you're coming from because I was like after Witch Child, I was desperate for something to really kind of grip me. And it's funny, I'll always go back to that book if I need something that's just going to grip me and make me excited and get me going. And somebody gave me Pretty Little Liars. And it was just this odd sort of thriller crime series. And it was so easy to read. And they're so short. They're only like about 150 pages, 108 pages. And I find those really easy to fly through. But nothing yet has gripped me in the same way as Witch Child has. And it's almost sad because every YA I read, I sort of measure it up to sort of you and Marianne. And I'm like, I'm waiting for somebody to top that. And it's just not happened yet. And I'm like, come on, people,
that's good to
challenge
know.
me. Challenge me. But yeah, and I laugh because, you're the reason partly I got into fantasy was because I loved the witch element of it, and I kind of imagined, what would it actually be like if she was a witch.
Yeah.
So I kind of ended up into YA, and then I went into like more adult fantasy now. So I've experienced Sarah J. Maas, who's an incredible writer, and I got to experience Kelly Armstrong, who's did a fantastic what they call a quadrant novel, and it's got werewolves and it's got witches and it's got demons and half demons and people, normal people in it as well. So it's sort of a really good mix. And those are bigger books, but they're really enjoyable books.
Mm.
And I quite like the surface, you're seeing a resurface of fairy tales being taken and modernized. And I really enjoyed that experience too. And I think there's like a uniqueness about that that's coming out now. Whereas everyone's read fairy tales at some point in their lives, but I quite like the fact that they're taking these fairy tales, making them more true to what they would have been,
Yeah,
in these French saloons.
The real Grimm's fairy tales, the original ones. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I've when I wrote, I suppose speculative fiction, I think they call it now, but
Yeah.
for young adults, like point horror, really.
Yeah.
And those they were spooky books for Hodder and things. I mean, I really enjoyed doing them. But I would always, and so I read a lot of real inverted commas ghost stories, and
Yeah.
also fairy tales and myths, and because that's where the magic, if there's magic, it's coming up from there. So
Yeah.
if you're writing that's something that is, I mean, it's not high fantasy, but even high fantasy borrows from
Fairy
myths,
tales. Yeah.
and fairy stories, and that kind of is really interesting. I think it's a really interesting area and I think they're great for mining into, for all sorts of strangeness. They've got their sort of eerie qualities, strangeness and
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
otherness, and those that interests me as an area of fiction.
Well, then I really honestly recommend Thorns of Court and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. I think you would find it, since you've enjoyed Game of Thrones, I think you would actually find that incredible, just with the way that she builds it. I really do sort of love that. And if you get a chance to look into the Dark by Fiona Cummings, that
Okay,
is a gripping novel.
You'll have to send me a reading list afterwards, and I'll
Yeah, we can exchange reading lists. Because I quite liked some of your. I like American crime very much so. In fact, I watch a lot of true crime stuff because I love it. And the pandemic has allowed me to almost indulge in that a little bit, to discover all these crime shows that I never knew existed. For instance, I've just really found True Detective, and it's got Matthew McConaughey in it, and
oh right, yeah.
I had no idea he'd done this, and it was such a complete, because I'm used to him as the rom-com guy, so here I am seeing as this serious cop, and I'm thinking, what is this? Like, totally threw me for a loop. And I thought it was going to be like little, detective stories, not realizing it's going to be one detective story for an entire season. So yeah, the pandemic at least has allowed me to indulge in the sort of televisional world. I was going to ask, have you actually gotten to see Bridgerton yet?
Pardon?
Have you gotten to
Bridgerton?
see Bridgerton?
No, I have problems with Bridgerton. I haven't watched Bridgerton. I
Oh
watched.
no,
I
why?
don't. Well, it's strange. Some things that I just don't appeal to me at all.
Yeah,
Um, I think it's a distortion
it is.
um,
Yes.
of history. I don't want to get into real deep trouble here, but it there's something not right about it.
It's very
Because of what
romanticized.
happened. And I'm a real stickler for this is what happened in history. You can't mess about with it, or this is what
Yeah.
must have happened. I mean, you don't know exactly what happened, but that you know the parameters of what was possible and what not possible. So that's how I see it.
For me, I mean, I like Shona Land as a company, as a television company, because I've seen a lot of their stuff, and anybody that's watched Grey's Anatomy or Station 19 understands they do really good programming. And when Bridgerton came out, I kind of got in my mind it was going to be historically accurate. I don't know why I thought it was going to be historically accurate, but I'm like, I got myself all geared up, and then I was really deeply disappointed when it wasn't. And I must admit, I watched it hoping and praying that it would not be bad. And
Mm.
I was very let down with that. And so I can understand, how you feel on that and your feelings on that. Because it's terrifying for me as a writer as I'm writing my very first historical fiction because I don't want to romanticize it in the least. So when you go to a bookstore or the charity shop, where do you feel drawn to in the genre settings more than anywhere else?
Um, it. I'm quite an omnivorous reader. I read all sorts of different things. I don't read just in one
Yeah,
um, genre. That's a tough one. I mean, I'm a real kind of. I just go in. If say I'm going to Waterstones or at a normal bookstore,
yeah.
I will just look at. I look at the tables and think, oh, that look. I go by the covers. Oh,
I'm
that's a
terrible
good
for that
cover.
too.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's interesting. Or an author I've already know,
Yeah.
and it's a new one of theirs. I guess if I was going to a section, I'd probably go to crime
Yeah.
and maybe, but just maybe horror and fantasy, but
Yeah.
only to have a really close look because there's a lot that I don't like.
Yeah.
Um,
No, I
that
get you on that.
I
Yeah.
really don't like, but something that's just different, that but often those are the ones that I'll pick up off the tables. So the tables work, because
Yeah.
they work with me anyway. And that's often how I discover new things.
Yeah.
Um, Amazon is different because I don't usually go for their recommendations
No, I don't
because
either.
I don't like being I don't like being manipulated by the algorithm that
Yeah.
you will like this. How do you know I'm going to like that? I'm not going to like that. I'm not going to like that because you said I was going to like it.
Yes, I have the
So
same opinion. Yeah.
I usually I only go to Amazon to get something specific that I've read about, seen,
Yep.
someone's told me about, then I'll go and get it. But I just don't like that. I really hate that feeling of being manipulated by
By the
their
computer. Yeah.
algorithm. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a terrible habit is if I've got a set of books that I'm looking for, I do it on eBay because there's no rhythm telling me you've got to buy this,
Yeah. That's
and I can
that's
just Google it on eBay, and it's like you can get it for £1. You're almost recycling in a way, so I don't
yeah,
feel
exactly.
bad about cutting down trees.
No, no, I know I can feel that. Yeah,
Yeah,
I sometimes I get books. Depending really on what I'm writing, but I get quite a lot of books from A Books anyway. So they're
yeah,
secondhand from booksellers. If I can, I'll buy them from an actual bookseller, not the book depository, which is just a. I mean, it seems I think Amazon taking that over now. So
yeah.
I think that's good because that it keeps the little secondhand book shops
Stores
going
going.
because they are
Yeah, yeah,
selling things online. So
And
Um,
I think particularly in the pandemic, they got hit really hard because some of them had
they
cafes
did
in them, and I
because
just
they got
felt for them. Like, and that's why I was like, I knew a lot of them took to eBay to sell their books, and I know that I don't like throwing out books either. So what I do is I will put them on eBay for a while, and if they don't sell on eBay, I donate them to the charity shop because I want other people to love the books. I don't want them to be sitting, in a rubbish heap somewhere. And that's how I kind of share and I keep the cycle of reading going almost. And that's why I decided to do it with eBay. And also, you find that you don't get hit with a lot of the hidden costs that Amazon hit you with too. So, like, instead of I've seen like £1 or maybe £2 being added to some people's books when you can get them, in Waterstones for less, or you can get them, on eBay for less. But the author's still making the money. It's just you're not getting flinched an extra £2 because it's Amazon. So yeah, I started looking elsewhere, and I know that sounds awful, and everyone's going to be like, "Arr!" But in a way, I had to do that because there's a lot of, like, when you're buying a lot of books, it costs. The
yeah,
costs add up.
absolutely. I mean, and if you've actually got a lot of books, like I got a lot of books, um, I have to, like, you're right. I just can't think about throwing them into a tip. I just can't think about doing that. I think it's awful. So I have to find ways of shifting them, and
Rehoming them,
not
yeah.
from overwhelming the local Oxfam bookshop. And yeah, I was so any tips on how to move your books on and acquire other ones? I never thought of buying them on eBay at all. I always think
Yeah,
that people
and I mean the great thing is you
buy,
can
I don't
actually
know,
get signed
fiction or
copies,
something.
because if you go on the what they call premium collections, or to try and get a signed book, you're talking about £30 for a signed copy. And sometimes what the bookshops do, particularly Waterstones does, is if they have extra signed copies, they stick them on eBay. They don't put it on Amazon, they put them on
Oh,
eBay.
right.
So it's
Oh, I didn't know any of that. So
yeah,
that's
so
really
like
good. Yeah.
I go on there and I can get a signed copy, and then that to me is it's like it makes it extra special, and I don't want to get rid of it. However, then Ian looks at me funny when like the books start coming in the post, and he's like, "Crystal, what have you been buying?" And I have to own up to it. But yeah, it's so weird because that is that's my little trick that I do, and I know a lot of readers have said to me, "Oh, how do you get all these books?" And that's how. And to rehome mine, I'm terrible. I give them to my mother-in-law, and I say, "Yeah, can you stick this down in the charity shop?" And she'll actually let her friends go through the books first, and if they like the look at any, they go with them. And then I know they're being read and they're passed around the holiday park, and then they eventually get to the charity shop, maybe
Well,
like a year and a half later. But it's good.
that's the most important thing, isn't it? That
Yeah.
they're getting read by someone.
Yeah, and that's what I said, to her. I'm like, as long as the books are being read and it's not just collecting dust or, kind of getting to that point where they're falling apart because they haven't been read or they're lying in a skip. That to me seems like an awful end to that life of a book. So yeah, that's something I do. So we're going to get into the writing portion of this podcast. So I'm going to ask you, how do you get your mind into the darker sort of elements of your story? Because I know with you had sort of like that constant running fear factor in a lot of your earlier stuff, and I know that you have that in your new one as well. So how do you get your mind into that sort of place to do that?
Um, and I know I've pondered and thought about this, and it's quite. I don't know really. I just kind of when I'm writing, I just think myself into whatever the situation is and whatever the character is, and explore. I mean, if it's their emotions, but also I like. I mean, when I wrote for young adults, I used
Yeah,
to actively want to frighten them.
yeah,
If I'm writing scary stuff, I think of them. I put myself in that situation and things that think, well, if it's going to scare me, it will scare other people. So
yeah,
I'm just
exactly.
and I really like that. I like that kind of writing. So I like creating atmosphere. It's one of the things I enjoy most in writing. So I guess I just, yeah, I just do it. I don't really know how or why. I
See,
just do.
I'm terrible because when I the dark stuff comes out easy for me. But see that kind of when it gets to that point where I have to write the end and I have to say goodbye and I have to move on to the next thing, I procrastinate because that to me is the worst part, is writing the end. I hate
In
writing
your
the
world.
end.
Sometimes I mean, I used to be like to be the opposite. I used to want to finish it, and
All
then
right.
people, yeah, and the editor would say, you know, you're really galloping to the end there. You said it's a bit, you know, it's a bit sudden. You
Yeah.
have to make it longer. You write more. But I get to no, that's it. That's the end of the story. That's it. End of this
Yeah.
story. Beginning of another one, but I'm not writing that one.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean,
yeah,
I think it's because like to me every book I get so attached to the characters because I write based on emotion. So I get emotionally invested in it. And then the idea of shutting it and walking away and going and writing something else is almost foreign because I've gotten so used to being dwelling in that world and dwelling
yeah.
within them. And then the idea of saying, "Okay, you guys are done. Your whole story is done. Go off and live your." It's so weird to me. And also, I tend to my brain once it finishes a book, it deletes it so that I have room for the next one.
Yeah, I think that's I think that's very common. It's also something people don't understand. So that
Yeah,
when they read the book, even if you wrote it 20 years ago, in some cases, like 20 years, like Witch Child 20 years ago,
yeah,
um, they expect you to have the freshness of
yes,
they've
exactly.
just read it, so it's
Yeah,
fresh in their head. So it's quite sometimes. I don't find it that difficult because it's there somewhere, like in a compartment. But it's
yeah,
like I guess in a like an archive box that you have to open up and then you have to go through again to find out to remember why you wrote this or why you did it like that or those
yeah,
sorts of details. What I don't, I can remember things like that. I can even remember like what I was thinking on the page. What I
yeah,
can't remember sometimes recall is things like how old Mary is because
yeah,
I think her age changed about 4 times. She was younger, then she was older because of the nothing to do with the actual book, but to do with the publishing of the book and
yeah,
where they want to place it in the market. And most readers are like horrified. Well, she's either 13 or she's 10. Well, no, she's not 10 because they decided she had to be played. It was a young adult book, so she had to be
she had to be
older. And
13,
they're
yeah.
like, no, that's not how books should work, but it is how they work to some
Yeah,
degree. But I think to answer your question in another way, I think we all, if we write that kind of fiction where dark things happen and dark things are explored, we are exploring the darker parts of ourselves. You know,
yes,
the
that's true.
darker parts of our characters, of our lives, of our mental landscape and emotional landscape. We
Mm.
go into those areas that other people perhaps don't or shut the door on. And I think there's a lot of movement between the conscious mind and the subconscious or
Yeah,
unconscious mind, the dream world. You know, the dream mind, and I
yes.
think that we can access that maybe easier than other people can.
And I think writers and I've kind of heard this from a lot of different ones is we tend to remember our dreams better. Like so if we have that nail biting awful nightmare, it lingers with a lot of us.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean,
And
I've got
that's
a
kind of
friend.
good feel sometimes if you really need to get like if you've got a book and you know it has to have a really dark section in it, you can almost tap into those nightmares and almost open a spare file and say, right, I'm going to pour my heart out into this because I spent all last night in a cold sweat because I had a nightmare about something totally unrelated. um and that's what I found works for me in particular is if I've had a night of whatever because I've had a temperature or whatever and I've had the nightmare from hell, it's easier for me to then go write that darker side. And I mean, I laugh because I've been working on a crime novel now for, gosh, it's coming on what, 6 years, 7 years. But in order for me to get into the dark parts of that particular story, I have to wait till I have that nail biting nightmare, and it doesn't always come. You can't just like plan, right? I'm gonna have a nightmare tonight. So I kind of had to write it over periods of time when the nightmares that I get from having medical PTSD actually erupts and I can tap into it. And I'm really lucky because I've got a detective in America who I work with, and he's retired now, thank goodness. But he was on TV and he made his name investigating these crimes. And he's really good at just sort of saying to me, well, this is procedure and this is procedure, do this and do that. And he keeps me right. But he knows that it takes me a long time to get to that point because I have to have that darkness seeping in through. And I must admit, I've done a lot of writing on it in the past year because I've had a lot of health issues. So I've had those nightmares because of the health issues. So I kind of, that's how I do it. And I think it comes through in my writing when I do it that way. Whereas if I try and force it, it doesn't necessarily work as well. And I know that is the case for Marie's world, where she's having to feel the betrayal, and I was sort of going through that own dark betrayal period of my own life, and it gave me that emotional connection to be able to write it legitimately and in a way that I knew other people would be able to connect into and understand. And that, I almost felt like you were going through a similar thing when you were writing your stuff, that you were tapping into stuff that you were feeling or you were dealing with, and it was really shining through on the page for you too.
Yeah, I think it definitely can. If you're going through a difficult, it can be translated out of whatever you're suffering or whatever your time you're going through into something that is unrecognizably different. But the strength and the power of the emotion is under the page, as it were, that the
Yeah,
reader senses it. It might not be on the page, but they're sensing the power of the emotions. And I think that is very effective when you're writing, that you really do have to go into the dark places, because if
yeah,
you don't, they don't have that feeling of authenticity, of emotion, even if it's really difficult, even if it's not really anything that then the thing that you've experienced, you can by proxy experience it. You can think,
yeah,
well, if I was in that situation, how would I feel? And you
yeah,
can go into it. And I think that's the skill of the writer, and that's what makes writers different, is that they can do it and they're prepared to do it. And other people would shy away or would not want to do that. They don't want to think about it. So
yeah.
you think about the things other people don't want to think about, I think.
Yeah, and I think we're also curious in that regard. Like we're almost like cats. We're very curious, and
Yeah.
it sometimes gets us into trouble, our curiosity, I think. But I know, particularly for me, if I'm in hospital, I am so curious. I have conversations with everybody, and my husband usually looks at me funny as if to say, Crystal, you've talked to like every single person on your ward, or you've talked to every single nurse, and all of them know me because I'm curious. I want to know these people. So yeah, I definitely think that. So when you write, is it for you like a jigsaw puzzle you're putting together, or do you have a movie kind of feel when you're writing your books?
Oh no, it's like a film. When if I'm writing, like really writing, it's always like a film.
Yeah,
I mean, I have to zoom in and out and sort
yeah,
of like, um, okay, what's in that corner and what's in the background and what's around the person. Even if you're not going to describe it, you have to know, because
yeah, exactly.
otherwise they're just there. You're not with no context. Um, so yeah, it's always like a film, I think. Sometimes the whole thing is like a jigsaw puzzle, but
Yeah,
maybe that's more like editing a film together.
I
So do you
think
know what I
so.
mean?
Yeah,
So
like it must be like that when they're putting a film together because
yeah,
they're
I
having to
think the
slice it.
film, for me, the film is a much better analogy. That is what I see. I see it in my head, and then I
Yeah,
write down what I see. And also because it's like multi-dimensional,
Yeah, has to be. Yeah.
isn't it? So I also write down what I feel and what my character's feeling and what the other characters are feeling. And so I'm writing down all the things, not just a film, you just see it, but it's more, I don't
Experience
know,
it.
it's a bit like you're creating a scene in somebody else's head, and in their head it can have everything in it. Can have the sound of the wind, it can have wetness of water, it can have tears, it can
Yeah.
have deep fear, all of those things that the reader will experience if you're writing it in the right way. And
Yeah.
so that's how I write.
I mean, because I've admired people that say, "Oh, you know, we write a chapter here, and then I might go back and write a chapter there, or a scene here, or a scene there." And I think to myself, "Wow, when it comes to putting all that together, that must be an incredible feat." Because for me, I have to write lineage, that big fancy word that I
I
can't
do
say,
too.
but I have to write it in order because if I don't, I lose completely where I am. Doesn't mean that I haven't broken down every single chapter with bullet points so I know how it's going to work, because I do. But I could never, like, I have one book that I'm trying to piece together that's all scenes, and it has driven me mad for 4 years because it is such a hassle trying to say, okay, that scene goes with this and that chapter goes there. And I wish I hadn't done it. It was a writing style I tried, and I
Yeah.
now really, really hate because I'm still trying to fix it. And I'm 4 years on, and I'm like, argh. But I get it because I had to do it to experience what other writers had done and what other writers have tried. But yeah, I have a great admiration for them for that reason. For you, which character have you written that stayed with you the most or the longest after you finished their story?
Oh, character? Which
Yes.
character? Oh, it would have to be Mary, really, from Witch Child, because she was with me for two books, for
Yeah.
Witch Child and Sorceress, and that
Yeah.
they took a while. I mean, not the longest I took to write a book, or even two books, but she was an intense character,
She
and
was, yeah.
because I wrote about her as a child, but also a woman.
Yeah.
Um, and she was there for with me for a long, long time. And it was like, like you were saying about not wanting to leave the book. Um, it was strange because she actually left the book.
Yeah.
She more or less said, "That's it. There's not no more. There's no more about me."
Yeah,
And
exactly.
it was really strange. I mean, that was the end. She just walked out of the book in a way and disappeared. Um, So yeah, I mean, she was the one who stayed with me most. I think also Nancy and Minerva in Pirates.
Yeah.
They stayed with me too because I just loved them as characters. They were just such joy to write. They were joys to write, those two.
And they
They're
were really,
such
they came across so well as, as
that they were
characters as
just
well.
such amazing characters, and I mean they just were. They came alive. I mean
Yeah.
Nancy right from the beginning. But Minerva wouldn't for a long time. She was unknowable. She was like, I don't know
A
why you're
ghost,
even
yeah.
writing about me. Um, but then she did too. And I mean, she came alive because of her friendship, because Nancy brought her alive. It was
Yeah.
just magical. And I like it, a magic trick. And it wasn't a trick, it was just a magical thing happening, that these characters were there and they were
Yeah.
real. And that's special when that happens. It doesn't always happen.
I had that
Not
experience
always make
when
it
I
happen
had
either.
I brought in this character Amber, who's the half sister to the twins, and she was almost like I was hitting a brick wall with her to begin with. Like she was there, but she wasn't
Yeah,
like, she was like a stone cold wall.
wouldn't let you know her.
No, and then all of a sudden she just sort of opened up, and she was this hugely really important character. I had never planned to have her in the entire
Yeah.
series,
Don't you love
and
that?
she kind of took over a little bit, and I'm like,
I love that when it happens, because
yeah,
it means that however much carefully you've planned your book out, it's never going to be like that, because this character that wasn't there to start with, or even at all is suddenly there on the page and they've taken over. And
Yeah.
then they say, no, I'm not going to do that. Or no, she wouldn't do that. I'm not going to do that. And you
Yeah.
have to think of a whole new set of circumstances.
And I mean, for me, Amber ended up having her entire book because she just was this very dominating character who demanded that you know her and that you know her story. And I gave in and I gave her her very own book. Is there a character you wish you could have written more about, or that you would like to go back and write more about?
Um, yes, there is. There's two characters really. In Miss Graham's War, my latest one, there's the character of Dory, who's an ex SOE agent, and she's a great character, and I'd love to write a book about Dory. And also, I'm very interested in Adeline, who is the photographer,
Yeah.
and I'm interested in women in war,
Yes.
women's role in war, and women who did extraordinary things, like the American and British also, but a lot of American photojournalists and women journalists were extraordinary, and they just did the most astonishing things in the teeth of male opposition
Yeah.
and discrimination and not being allowed to go here, go there. Not, I mean, they had to. Martha Gellhorn smuggled herself on to a boat going over to D-Day, and
Yes.
attached herself to the nurses because
Yeah.
they were not allowed anywhere near the battlefield, but because she was in the hospitals and
Yes.
talking to the nurses and the young GIs who were being brought in, blown to pieces and with terrible injuries, and telling their stories and
Yeah.
sending their stories back to America. And it was just, amazing, because that's what people wanted to hear about. They wanted to hear what's
Exactly.
happening to their sons and their husbands and their brothers, and they were
And a lot
telling
of them
those
didn't
stories.
believe what was coming out, especially when they were going to the cinemas and they were watching it in the cinema settings. I know, like, when I started doing my own series, my own World War II series, which I've been building for quite some time, because I actually went and spoke and spent time in the nursing home that my mom worked in, and I spoke to quite a few of the older ones, and I got their stories about running the bus mission from Shetland across into these countries, and they were not trained, Navy, they were not trained Army, they were not trained RAF, but here they were going with their fishing boats across this dangerous piece of water to help people, get people to safety. And they were also going out and they were sort of getting the ones that were being left in the ocean to drown, they were rescuing them and they were giving them that opportunity, a second life. And to me, that was what made me interested in when I decided to sit and write it, because these stories are going to get forgotten about, because a lot of the people from World War II time are slowly slipping away from
Yeah,
us.
yes, they are. Their voices are
Yeah.
being
And particularly,
silent.
I think it's now more important when we're looking at the situation in Ukraine and we're looking at the hostile tensions. And Shetland played a big role, and most people don't actually know this, but they played a big role in the Cold War because they had the radar system that was put in and they had the listening technology, and they were able to pass on to the British government, hey, this Russian ship can get by the radar system. Or, we've seen an influx of Russian ships in the North Sea fishing or just doing patrols or doing flyovers. And that was valuable information for Britain. And I kind of decided that I wanted to sort of keep these memories going, keep these stories alive. And I know it's going to take me a long time to write the story the way I
Well,
want to, but it would be worth it.
really, really interesting. Very interesting. I love books that are about some aspect, say, of the war that I don't know anything about,
Yeah.
and I don't know anything about that. I mean, I think I read somewhere about how Shetland would ferry people from Norway. They would,
Yeah.
people escaping through Norway, or from Norway, they would pick them up and bring them to the
Yeah.
Shetland Islands.
And sometimes, we look at the Isle crossings in horror, but that was actually going on in World War II. People were trying to go across in dinghies, they were trying to go across in power boats, whatever they could get their hands on, because
Yeah.
they were fleeing for their lives. And Shetlanders, because they were always in the sea fishing anyway, which I don't think people realize that Shetlanders were out most of the year fishing, they would pick up these boats and they would rescue these people. And they didn't ask, are you German or where are you from? They didn't care.
Yeah.
It was, they abided by the law of the sea. And the
Yeah.
sea was what was important to them.
And they have to be rescued.
Yeah, and when I tried to sort of tell the stories kind of as an anthology, they said, no, it's not going to work. I had so many publishers tell me that wouldn't work. So what I've done is I've tied it to the last royal line that connects Scotland to Shetland, the last Earl and the last Lady of Shetland. And that seems to be a really good catalyst for those stories, because you're taking it from the perspective of the women that are waiting at home for these men to come back, waiting to hear if a ship has come back to the port. But you also hear about the Shetland women who went to extraordinary lengths to feed their neighbours and their own families. You're talking about women who would take out little rowing boats into a North Sea, and North Sea is not an easy sea. It's a very wild sea, to get enough fish to feed their families, because they knew those fishing boats were needed to rescue people. So it was, that stories to me were super important, and I was so shocked that nobody else had written them. So that, that's what I've been working on in the secret background of. Yeah,
I'd love to read it when you finish it.
I will send you it. You will, once it's done with the editors and stuff, I will send it. But I mean, do I think it'll find a publisher? No. But the fact that I've written it and I know that I've rescued it and it's there, that's
I really would like to read it.
Yeah. So I can't wait to share that. It's been a long, difficult road, but I'm enjoying it. So what techniques over your years have you found the most helpful? And has there been one that you've thought, why did I try that? What was I thinking?
Well, yeah, it's well, I kind of avoid the ones that I know that won't work for me. Like I don't like I can't just write.
Yeah.
I have to have some sort of plan or some sort of
I think they call it
idea where I'm going, some sort of story plan. But I don't like a very detailed one, because if I have to, by the time I've written a detailed plan out, I've lost interest in it. I don't want
yes, that's me. Yep.
The whole thing. And I guess the techniques that I found most useful as a writer are the Pomodoro, like what the having a timer on your desk, and you write for half an hour. They say, I'm only going to write for half an hour. It's okay, at half an hour I could do half an hour, and of course you do far more than half an hour. So I found that really useful if I was just finding it really difficult to settle down to write. And also for a while I was Julia Cameron, the Writer and Artist's Way.
Yeah.
And I found that really useful when I was going through quite a difficult time with writing and not knowing what I wanted to write. Yeah. And I followed her pages, like you get up in the morning and the first thing you do is write 3 pages. Yes. Like journaling, I think they probably call it now. But I found that really, really helpful of getting me out of a bit of a
See, I do that actually. And it's weird because I will set myself a target and I'll be like, okay, today I'm going to do 1,000 words. And of course I'll end up doing more than 1,000 words, but it's good because I've got that goal that I have to tick in my head.
Yeah.
To almost make me say, okay, I've achieved my stuff today. I can go and cross stitch, or I can go and, spend time with my husband and not feel too guilty that I'm not putting in the hours. The only time that doesn't work for me is when I'm doing edits. because I have to go so slowly through my edits to make sure I don't miss anything.
Yeah.
So what should take me like a couple of days will actually take me 2 or 3 weeks because I do 10 pages, stop, take a break, go back, do another 10, because I don't want to rush it and make mistakes. And I didn't do that when I first started out. And it's almost the longer I've been doing this, the more I have to force myself to like, okay, let's just calm it down, do 10 pages. And it's good because by the time I finish 10 pages, I finish my cup of coffee. So it gives me an excuse because I can get up, go to the bathroom, make another cup or grab some biscuits and go back, or get up and go and I actually eat my lunch and not forget to eat, which is a terrible habit of mine when I'm really in the groove. Or sometimes Ian says I look like a mad scientist because I forget to brush my hair and it's all in different, layers and spikes and stuff. Anybody who's got frizzy hair understands that. A little bit of humidity and it goes. And he thinks it's hilarious, so it does not help situations. So going into the last part of our podcast tonight, we're going to talk about your life and the things that you do outside of writing. So what's the first thing you do when you want to de-stress and kind of get away from editing and writing?
Well, sometimes I literally walk away from it.
That's a good idea.
I like walking. So if I'm stuck, I go out for a walk. If I'm writing something, I've got to a difficult, knotty bit, go out for a walk. I've got a friend who said, if you've got a writing problem, you go out for a walk and you don't stop. You cannot turn around and come home until you have sorted it out. And quite often it actually works because the rhythm of walking, I find it quite releasing. So I swim, and I'm not all the time, but I do like swimming, and I can go swimming and swimming again. I think the physical movement, moving your body, frees your mind and lets it relax, not stress. It does,
yeah.
And then the ideas and things come, and you think, oh yeah, why can't I do that? I also do yoga, and Kundalini
I swear
yoga.
by that. Yeah, yoga's, I swear by it because I feel like it just calms you almost in a way.
Yeah.
And it helps focus your mind. I think for me, like I get so distracted by the world around me. And I think that's a lot to do with the learning difficulties I have. So I have to literally focus in on something in order to think through my problems in writing. So like if I'm having an exceedingly bad day with writing, I will go cross stitch and I'll put a podcast on. And I'm guaranteed by the end of the podcast, I'll have worked out where I've gone wrong or worked out how to fix the problem. Because I think with my disease, I wish I could walk away from it and go for a long walk, but I can't because I know like I'll go so far and then my body will be like, you do realize you have to walk home, right? And it kind of reminds me and I'm like, oh crap, I gotta walk home now. See if I could just walk to one place and then teleport back, that would be so much easier. It's the walking home part that I was never good at. So yeah, but I love that. I love like the idea of just walking away from it. So what hobbies would you do you enjoy, and what ones would you want to explore if you had more time to explore them?
Well, I don't really have. I don't really have any hobbies apart from things like yoga, and I do quite a lot of yoga. I do Kundalini yoga as well, and they're not kind of hobbies though, are they? They're kind of sports, really. I quit promising myself, and I have been promising for many years that I was I'll take up drawing. There's a book called Drawing on the Left-Hand Side of the Brain, which I bought years ago. Someone bought for me, and I've never actually done it. And so I think I'd like to try that. Yeah, I would like to do. I'd like to do something. I'm really terrible at sewing. I cannot sew.
It took me a long time to learn how to be good at it.
No, I think I was traumatized as a child because I'm left-handed, and it's quite difficult to teach left-handed children knitting and sewing because they do everything backwards as far as the teachers are concerned. And so I think I was just utterly traumatized. So I don't like sewing, and I don't like knitting. I can't knit
It's funny you say that because
or crochet.
my at the time I learned, I was ambidextrous. So I could use either hand, and I was really good at either hand. But my gran got a hold of me. I was sort of like 7 or 8, and she started with me. And she's like, "You are going to learn to knit." Okay. Because her rule in her house was you couldn't be sitting in her house and do any, like, your hands had to be doing something. She
Yeah.
had this great belief in idle hands cause problems. And so she would just always have us knitting or sewing or, um, and my dad, he got away with it because he was a boy. So boys didn't have to, but boys had to know how to paint. So my brother had to do the drawing and I was doing the sewing. And I reckon that's probably given me and him the patience that we have because we've got this endless amount of patience for people and certain things that we're doing. And I think that's where we get it from. But she said, "You're
Hmm.
not having any of this ambidextrous stuff. You're going to sew with your right hand and you're going to knit with your right hand. And I don't care if it's difficult." So, she kind of laid the law down on me. And I was like, okay, Nana, I'll do exactly as you tell me to do. And I did. And I'm grateful for that because I can give my family like cushions I've made or embroidery pillows I've made or quilts that I've made. I can do the front of the quilts, but see, actually doing the sewing machine part,
Mm.
I'm not any good at that part. So I normally give that to like my mother-in-law or my mom, and I'll say, "Right, could you sew this up because I need to give it to so and so," and I can't do it. But they're actually trying to force me to do it now, so I'm having to use a sewing machine for the first time. God knows, 20 odd years. I was fighting with it the other day, and my hubby thought it was the most hilarious thing he'd seen. But sometimes you need to do that, and it's funny you say that because my next question was going to be, are you somebody that likes crafts, and if not, then what other ways do you kind of explore your creativity and relax at the same time?
Well, I've actually just answered the question really. No, I'm not a crafty person. I don't do crafts, but I do like to cook. I like
Oh,
cooking, so
yeah.
I guess that's probably how I my other area of de-stressing and creativity. I really
It's a
like
good
cooking.
one. It's a really good
So
area to have, though.
like it's Miss Graham's Cold War cookbook it was to start with, and that I mean I do like cooking, and I like cookery, and I like cookery books. I like cookery writing. So yeah,
Yeah.
I guess I would say cookery would be one of my areas of creative activity.
See, my hubby put me off that because he's such a picky, eater that I can't cook for him because he doesn't like things I cook. So I kind of learned. I learned to kind of get away from that. For me, as the readers know, my my health is my reason to slow down and enjoy every day. So, what is your thing that makes you slow down and sort of smell the roses and appreciate the day?
Well, I've got a really small garden, but I like being in the garden,
Yeah,
and I like being in nature. I like walking in the fields, and we where I live is in a town, but
yeah,
within 100 yards there's countryside, and
yeah.
I like that. I like to be outside, out in the fresh air, or even in the parks. The looking at the trees, looking at the water and the rivers. I like rivers and water. Um,
That's cool. Yeah, I really like that answer because it's for me like I don't have that choice almost. Like, COVID was a great reminder. It was almost like a mortal reminder to me that I have to really enjoy every day because with my disease, um, you never know when you're going to hit a complication, and you never know when you're going to spend sort of 6 months or 3 months in hospital sometimes.
mhm.
And anybody knows anything about living in hospital, you don't get any peace and quiet. It's not a thing.
Yeah, no,
Convalescing's
it's
not a
very
thing.
difficult.
So I kind of almost enjoy every day that I'm out. It's like, yes, I've gotten 6 months out. I'm doing really well. And I have to almost enjoy those milestones a bit. And my hubby never actually realized that because I went through a period of being really, really well. And then I started having these sort of random sabbatic stays. and he would actually watch me marking the good times of, okay, I've been out for 3 months or 6 months or 9 months. And that, COVID was a big reminder of, you're not guaranteed every day. And I was sort of reminded of that, especially when I was told, you're high risk, don't leave the house.
Yeah, you must have felt very vulnerable.
Yeah. And then it was really that I felt vulnerable. I felt caged. And I wanted to go all these places, and I wanted to go out, and I couldn't go out because there was all these restrictions. And at the time, I didn't even because the information was so kind of varied, I didn't even like going out in the garden because I was scared one of the neighbors would come over and I would have to try and keep 2 meters distance, and it was that odd kind of change of living for me. It almost sort of threw me for a loop, but it's made me very appreciative. And now that the restrictions are lifted, I am going to cafes and I am going to restaurants and I am kind of getting back out there. But for 2 years, I was getting close to the I can't leave the house because it was such a terrifying time for me. And I think there's been a lot of people that's been going through that. And our last question, which I know that you've probably answered, I'm going to say, what's your favorite place to curl up in during the day? Your garden or somewhere in the house? Or
I like to be. I mean, the garden has to be warm though.
Yes,
can't sit in the sun's got to be out. I mean, it's been a bit. It was really warm for a couple of days, and now it's even the cat's coming inside. So I like having some time where I can just sit in a chair in my study or even just lie on the bed and read.
Yes.
I just, it's such a luxury, prop yourself up with a couple of cushions and just read in the afternoon. It's great. Or on a settee downstairs or somewhere. So,
and husband usually sticks his head in and says, but he's still awake.
He likes watching TV a lot. I mean, he likes watching films and series and stuff on TV.
Yeah.
And I really don't like watching television in the day. I'm quite puritanical about it. So I won't watch television in the daytime. So I will read though. And so if I've got, I mean, often the day's full of lots of other things, but if I've got sort of, a couple of hours to just sit and read, it's just such a luxury. Or
it's an amazing thing.
Listen to a podcast or listen to a book, an audible book. I really like that.
See, I always say to husband, when we get our final house, I need a conservatory. And he can't understand this. But growing up in Shetland, everyone had conservatories because the weather's so bad. Yeah. You don't get out very often because it's always like 60, 80 mile an hour winds and there's no trees. So, and I don't think people kind of understand that when they come to Shetland and they look around and it's like, wait, where's your trees? They don't grow here because of the weather. So, yeah, conservatories was always the thing. And we would sit, and I loved my aunts. My aunts was my favorite. And I would sit in her conservatory, and she had just this big open space, and she had window seats built in to like the big circular window. And I would love to just get up on there with my little slippers. I'd take my slippers off, put my feet up, and have my cup of tea and my book, and I would read quite happily in the summer. And that was my space to go to. And then when I had to stick at my nan's, it was a window seat right at her living room. The only problem with that was all the cars that would go by were so distracting when I was reading. I'd be reading and then this car would go by and I'd be like, oh, Fred's just gone up the street, or whoever it was, like totally throw me. And I had to stop sitting there. But she actually did up her back bedroom for me. So I would go up there and it wasn't too cold and I could just sit and I could read and the birds would fly by the window and it was almost perfect. And I say that to Ian, like that's why Shetland houses has got so many windows, because we don't get any sunlight in the winter. It's awful. Yeah. But in the summer, we've got what's known as endless day. So like it doesn't set. So you get like and I have seen myself read all night because you kind of almost, your brain waits for the moon to come up to go to sleep. And of course, when you don't have that, I ended up writing one night, all night for like 2 days straight. I just wrote because there was all this light and I couldn't get my brain to switch off until I finished it. And then once I'd finished it, I just fell asleep. My dad's like, are you okay? But it was fantastic because the light was just such a big fuel source for me. And I love that. I kind of miss conservatories since I've moved, I must admit. I kind of say that to my husband all the time.
I'm with you there. I'd love a conservatory. I think
Yeah,
it'd be
and they're
great.
always nice and toasty too, so you don't have to worry
Yeah.
about like temperatures and controlling it and stuff. Yeah. So I'm gonna give you 4 words now because this is the word game, and
Okay.
it is very much themed on the witch girl because when I came up with it in my head, I had that book in my brain. So I apologize. There's a little bit of a theme. So my first word is herbs.
Herbs.
Yeah, like
Herb.
thyme and
Yeah.
rosemary.
So, I mean, how does it work? I've got to think of a
You just say the first word that comes to your head.
herb. So
Yeah,
if
so I give
you
you
say
herbs
herb,
and
what
then
do I
you,
say?
yeah.
I say medicine woman.
Ooh, I like that. Lamb.
Heath.
Okay. Thatched roofs.
Hmm?
Thatched roofs. You know, like in the olden days, you get thatched roofs with like
Oh, thatched
hay.
roof. Thatched roof cottage.
See, I thought that too. And then I had huts.
Hut.
Yeah.
Um, earth.
And
Earth.
forests. We'll finish with forests because that's always the best
Forest.
word.
Trees.
Yeah. See, I like that. I like the word game because it's sometimes good at racks stuff loose a little bit in my head. So I like doing that. But thank you so much for coming on. And it has been an absolute honor, honestly. I thank you so much for my career and for my journey. So thank you so much for coming on. And I will have to have you back when you do your next book.
Absolutely, and I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for inviting me. And it's
It,
yes, it's
I
wonderful
feel
to
so
know.
honoured, honestly. And I was
Um,
talking about you all day for like, I think it was 4 or 5 days straight. And Ian's like, would you shut up? He got to that point of his Glaswegian came out. He's like, "Arr!" And I'm like, okay, I'm going. So, yeah. But yeah, guys, join us back next week for the Book and Life podcast, where we've got another guest that you're not going to quite believe has shown up. So until then, see you soon.